All right, you guys are live.
And we'll talk to ourselves.
Hello, good evening. This is Joel Brightway from the Office of Law for the City of Annapolis. We're calling to order the Affordable Housing and Community Equity Development Commission. This Monday, March 22nd, 2021 meeting. Sorry we're getting on a little bit late, around 6:50. We want to give everyone an opportunity to join this first meeting. And our first item on the agenda, it's roll call. So now we proceed to seeing who is present, who are members of the board, of the commission rather. If proceed with Miss Kathy Ebner.
Present.
Nancy Lipson.
Present.
We have Jackie, is it Miss Wells?
Yes, present.
So we are present with 3 members of the board, and we have a quorum necessary to do business. The next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Have all the members of the commission had the opportunity to review the agenda?
Yeah.
Yes.
I move the approval of the agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a second?
Second.
So all voting to approve the agenda say aye.
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 Any nays? The agenda passes. The next item on the agenda is the election of the officers. And for this part of the agenda, we will now be accepting nominations for a chair and a vice chair of the commission.
I
Wow.
don't see anybody stepping up here.
You know, unless there is a strong feeling among others, Nancy and Jackie, I will offer myself up as chair.
I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
So can we have a motion from a non, yes.
I move the election of Kathy Ebner as chair of the commission.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Second.
Okay, thank you. And now we'll have a vote on the position of chair. So we're all going to vote by signifying aye, aye or nay. So for the vote on chair, Ms. Kathy Ebner being elected as chair, what say you, Ms. Lipson?
Aye.
What say you, Ms. Wells?
Aye.
What say you, Ms. Ebner?
Aye.
Okay.
It looks like, is Terry on now?
I'm here. I'm an I too.
Okay. So we are acknowledging the that Terry. Can I have your last name?
Bond, B-O-N-D.
Okay, Terry Bond has joined the meeting, and we have now elected a chair of the commission with Ms. Bond being present. So now I'll hand the meeting over to the chair for the rest of the election.
Well, had I known that. Well, I understand that, we had a good discussion earlier this week, or I guess it was last week, Joelle, where you helped, walk us through purpose of the committee. I think it would be helpful to revisit that with, Terry. I know Terry wasn't able to attend that meeting. And so if we could sort of review that, I think that would be helpful and helpful for the public to understand too.
That would be great for me. Thanks.
Briefly, we are still on the agenda item election of officers. So we have just elected a chair. So now we need to entertain a motion for vice chair.
Oh,
I would vote for, I would suggest Nancy.
So I'll accept that as a motion. Is there a second?
second.
Second.
Okay, and so now there's a motion on the floor, and we'll call the vote. All in favor of Nancy serving as vice chair, please signify by saying aye. We'll start with the chair, Ms. Ebner.
Aye.
We go to now Ms. Bond,
Aye.
and then also Ms. Wells.
Aye.
Okay, so now we have elected a chair and a vice chair, and I yield the floor to the chair for the remainder of the meeting.
Okay. So if there is no other business to attend to, then it brings me back to, my previous request.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that this brief indulgence, that's lawyer speak for just give me a minute while I collect myself. So we know that the Affordable Housing and Community Equity Development Commission is a commission that has 7 members, and among which 3 residents of the city, and all the members will possess a demonstrated interest in housing and community development concerns. They're appointed by the mayor and they're confirmed by the city council. Each member shall serve for a period of 3 years or until a member successor is appointed and confirmed. Commencing again with the city's fiscal year on the first day of June. Now we note that the term of one member cannot expire at each year, but what everyone is sworn in at the same time in the same year, it's going to be interesting how we eventually gain the stagger so that every year someone would be up for replacement on the commission, so that you wouldn't have the entirety of the commission change at the same time and the knowledge base leave with the commission. Consistent with the city code, we've just at our first meeting, we elected the chair and the vice chair. The chair and the vice chair shall serve for a 1-year term. If the chair is unable to attend the meeting, the vice chair shall serve as acting chair for that meeting. The commission will meet monthly, and special meetings may be called by the chair. The published agenda for each meeting may be revised by a majority vote with all the members present. And all action of the commission shall be by a majority of the members present. We note that 4 members of the commission shall constitute a quorum for the transaction of business. So that is a variation of the default rule. The default rule is if you have a 7-person commission, as long as I guess 4 in that case are attending the majority of commission, you would have a quorum there.
And when we talked before, we discussed tasks relative to the consent decree with HACA.
Sure. So as the public may know, the city of Annapolis has settled a litigation. As a result of us settling the litigation, we entered in what's called a consent decree. A consent decree is an agreement between the parties in a case to live up to certain terms, and after the terms have been satisfied, the consent decree is satisfied, the consent decree goes away. Among the terms in the consent decree for the federal court litigation was that the city of Annapolis would take certain steps to affirmatively further fair housing in the city by looking at certain workforce development housing that we see in the county. So one of the very first calls for this Affordable Housing and Community Equity Development Commission is to give an opinion, render an opinion on the housing statutes, which is the workforce development housing that comes out of Anne Arundel County, and then opine on what legislation should look like for the city of Annapolis. And that referral will be made back to the Health and Human Welfare Committee of the City Council prior to it receiving further discussion in front of the City Council.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
that's the main task, or is that just the first task?
That'll be the first task. It's the first task because the consent decree that was entered by the court in January requires there's a specific timeline for certain actions to be made. And a lot of critical actions are happening now within the first year of the consent decree. So this is one of the actions that the city committed to, which was looking at the Anne Arundel County's workforce development and housing initiatives and looking to see how any of that legislation might aid how the city of Annapolis views and develops its workforce development housing and affordable housing in the city.
Now, the consent decree made reference to a document that didn't seem to be attached to the version of the consent decree that we received. It would be helpful if you're able to forward that to us. I imagine it's probably a copy of this bill number 54-19, but just to verify
Yes.
what it is.
Yes, it's 54-19. I think it's 51-19 also from Anne
55.
Arundel County.
So, okay, so both legislations were attached.
No, one legislation was attached, but the essence is understanding that that was a first step in the direction around workforce development housing and affordable housing for the county. We are seeking input from this commission on what is the direction that the city should be moving in. Should we adopt legislation like this? Is there better legislation that we can adopt? Do we already have legislation in place that does the same thing as the county's legislation? And we're looking to get the best advice that the city can get on how to move forward, not only satisfying the terms of the consent decree, but what legislation can we really put forward to help and make sure that our workforce housing needs are met.
Right. And 5419, is specific to development of workforce housing, and actually the Anne Arundel County bill really references a lot of zoning provisions, which really makes sense in my mind for this group. But I wanted just to talk about the other bill, the fair housing. I'll just call it the fair housing bill. That was not attached to the consent decree. I'd like to just have a conversation about, are members of the commission comfortable reviewing a fair housing bill in light of what we bring to the table in terms of background and experience. And Teresa, Teresa and I talked about this as well. Teresa?
I don't think it's I don't think the bill that we're talking about is the fair housing bill. I think the bill that we're talking about is the second bill where the county is forgiving some capital connection charges or something like that. I think it's those two that we're looking at. We're not looking at the fair housing. I don't think, Joelle, correct me if I'm wrong, but
Brief indulgence.
I don't think we're looking in terms of workforce housing. I don't think we're looking at fair housing. We're just looking at the two, one about the capital connection charges and the other one, and the one that has to do with the zoning.
But the capital connection charges, I believe, is part of that same.
Oh, okay.
So it's all in the one bill.
Yeah.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay.
Right.
It says that workforce housing is exempt from 50% of the capital facility connection charges.
Yeah.
Unless we have a copy of what was with the consent order, I really don't think.
I'll be happy to send that over right now.
I don't think we're looking at fair housing.
So, but it would make sense that as a future task, we want to sort of think about whether there's a need to conform the two statutes, the counties and
right. There's
and
a couple
or not, right?
There are a couple of protected classes that they have that we didn't put in. Like one of them is age. There's no protection with regard to age. I think it's creed. We don't have creed, and there's another one. So there's like three groups that we don't have in our fair housing law that they have.
That they did. Okay.
But we do have source of income and
right, and that was the main reason that was the main thing that was fought over at the council for quite some time, as I recall. Not the cities, but the county. The county fought over both the workforce housing and the source of income.
Right. Well, cities already have source of income included in
right,
there, so.
right. But that's a future thing that we don't have to worry about right now.
Right, that's what I think, but I'm deferring to Joelle.
Okay. So I was a part of the negotiations and discussions. From my recall of the negotiations, the 5419 is the operable bill that we're looking at. 5419 is the workforce zoning bill concerning workforce housing. As
Right.
I look to the 5519, which is a fair housing bill,
Right.
again, to the extent if it becomes the opinion of the commission that we should be looking at increasing our fair housing legislation in terms of the class of people that are protected, we'll receive the recommendation, but I don't believe that that's governed by the consent decree. I do believe the workforce development housing, however, is a consent decree deliverable. But
So
of course, we'll accept
that's a
both
future
recommendations.
task.
Right.
That's a future task then.
Right, but the
Yes.
other thing too is the the city's Human Relations Commission oversees the fair housing law, so we would have to include the Human Relations Commission in discussion.
Right, but again, that's future. That's after we deal with.
Right. Or we may not be the main body involved with that.
Right. I mean, it really by right should go to the Human Relations Commission.
I mean, right. Not, yeah, I mean, obviously it's a critical issue. It's very important. It's just in reading through 5519, it's very technical. And it's, I would want to turn to some experts to help guide that discussion, because it's an area with which I know I don't have full background. And
On the fair housing?
on the fair housing side,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I've done a lot of fair housing. We just did the analysis of impediments to fair housing, so I'd be happy to go through both. And
If everyone can see my screen, I've shared the Anne Arundel County workforce housing bill. And again, this is just their quick 2-page, quick bullet points. But again, they show, again, for workforce housing, they wanted to reflect on home ownership, rental, and to provide affordable options for people that work throughout the county.
Well, I think, the main thing that we really have to think about is how we're going to approach this. MPDU is not it's not a piece of zoning legislation. Whereas the county's workforce housing is a zoning legislation. MPDU is a program. So we got to figure out, I think, what approach we want to take, or we would like the city to take, whether we think the program is the way to go, and therefore we incorporate some of the concepts from the zoning approach, or vice versa. Or do we have two separate approaches? I mean, I don't know. I think it's something we need to think about, because the workforce housing zoning approach is not particularly expansive.
And it's voluntary.
Yeah, and it's voluntary, and it doesn't. I think the city already has an approach that seems to provide more substance, more oomph.
Well, it is mandatory, so it is mandatory, and it does require production on the home ownership side, production of units, and on the rental side,
Right.
setting aside, so same. So, and it doesn't allow a fee in lieu anymore. So anybody that's doing 10 or more has got to pony up the, the units.
Right. So, Teresa, is there some? I'm sure you've done this, but where can we see exactly what MPDU has accomplished already?
I can tell you right off the top of my head.
Okay. All right.
So we only had one rental development during this whole time, and that was 1901 West, or now it's called Bell Annapolis. And actually, it's got 18 units, and those are the only rental ones that we have at this time. We had 10 home ownership units.
Can I add something though, that the county has a lot more land available to develop than we do.
Right.
And our
Right.
issue, so, you know, there isn't that much land for new development to come in. So it seems maybe one of our things should be looking at how to use existing development in a different way. You know, how to provide incentives to get existing whatever to provide, you know, the workforce housing rather than new development, because I think we're very limited. And in fact, MPDUs will get it in new development. And we are, you know, it's also looking at the densities. I'd love to better understand these zones and what this means to the county as opposed to the zones we have in this county. I mean, in this city, because they're different. They're not the same.
Yeah. Right.
Right. Well,
Mhm.
that's a problem. And the problem also is that this consent order specifically states that our job is to address this legislation.
Yeah.
Or am I wrong?
We
So-
can address it. We can
yeah.
analyze it and say what works and what doesn't work. I mean, that would be it, wouldn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
I was hoping that Sally Nash would pop on, the director of planning and zoning, because she would be the one really that can tell us more about the different zones and whether or not we could do something similar or not in the city based on our current zoning. So maybe we could invite Sally to come to the next.
Yeah, and that's what I'm
Mhm.
thinking. With the next agenda, we could definitely include, because this actually might be a good opportunity for us to brainstorm on what are the types of questions that we have for city officials. So we
Mhm.
have a question about its efficacy or use of the MPDUs and how that program's working. We want to talk about how do we incentivize infill development or redevelopment of assets within the city.
I think well, Joel, maybe I get this wrong. You just said assets in the city. I would guess that would mean available land, but my understanding is we already incentivized to get MPDUs. Don't we already allow?
It's
Right.
required.
With
Yeah.
density
Yeah.
bonuses, et cetera.
So we kind of already do that in a different sort of way, although it's only those additional units. It's not the whole development.
Well, the problem with the density bonus is typically most of all the projects that have come in, I'd say 50% were able to use the density bonus, and the other 50% weren't able to use the density bonus because of all the zoning restrictions. And that's why there were so many projects that became fee in lieu versus actually providing the units. So that's another thing that we might want to look at in terms of zoning is some of the.
Teresa, when you say zoning restrictions, are you talking about other things though too? Are you talking about other?
I'm talking about like setbacks and height, all these
Okay.
different things.
You're not talking about water and sewer or
No.
or transportation or anything else.
No, because the problem is that all the ones that got fee in lieu, and there were quite a number of them, the reason that they got it was because they couldn't even build to their maximum density, let alone use a density bonus, which is why they were able to pay the fee in lieu.
But when the MPDU legislation was revised, didn't it give more leeway to planning and zoning to make certain waivers and exceptions?
I
to that?
can't remember. I don't think so.
Okay.
But I can't, don't quote me on that. I have to go back and look.
I guess that's the other issue is the density we allow versus what the density the county allows. We may already have a higher density than the county. I don't know the answer to that question, but that's one that comes up.
Right. Well, that would be one. That'll be a good one to put on the agenda for next week is to have somebody from planning and zoning come and talk about all these different zones and the conditions, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, the city has how many different zonings? All right, what's it, 30 something? Versus the county only has, looks like you can count them on two hands. So that's right there is
that true? I think the county has a lot of zones.
Oh, do they?
Oh, we have a lot of zones too.
Yeah.
The one presentation I've seen from the director of planning and zoning regarding was probably form-based, where I think it was a discussion for the comp plan, whether the city should entertain form-based zoning as opposed to use-based zoning. And that was a fascinating discussion of the future of planning and zoning in the city. But I'm not sure if there was a decision made one way or the other about whether form-based might become, the wave of the future rather than how we are right now, stuck with different zones and use cases.
Mm.
Okay, so it sounds like, yeah, next go around, if we could have, Dr. Nash or somebody, from planning and zoning that could address questions about MPDU and also talk specifically about, in the interim, perhaps we could all read through this zoning legislation 54-19 and, really understand what it says and then try and apply it to the city and then come up with a list of questions.
Yeah,
Sounds
I'd like
right.
a little bit more specificity on the reduced water and sewer connections.
The one thing that's very
Mm.
interesting in this, it's even in their 2-page doc, the last thing it says, apply good land use policy rather than subjecting workforce housing to the political process. And I think that one of the things that probably they have done, it's by making it law, it's not subject to further discussion as to when a developer has a right to build certain types of projects. I think even now it talked about what are the conditions, and they talk about, well, these are the conditions that must exist to be able to get the right. And that's a very interesting way that they're balancing the two approaches, I guess.
Well, does anybody remember years ago, there was I think it was workforce housing proposal up on Route 2, this had to go through a special exception because I think they were getting higher density.
Right.
And the community was opposed to it. It ended up being senior housing. So I think that's where that particular comment comes in, is because they want to take it out of the public hearing process, which right now it is, to get
Plus-
a higher density.
Plus, they repealed one of the zones, so.
Yeah.
They repealed that zone. I can't remember what the zoning was, but they repealed it so that zone was no longer included.
Mm.
I was at that. I was at that hearing, public hearing, and it was very embarrassing for it. One of the councilmen told this woman who stood up and talked about how she was in a shelter. She had 2 jobs and couldn't find a place to live in the county. And the alderman or the councilman told her, well, okay, that's too bad. But if you can't afford to, live here, you don't need to be here.
Mm.
Well,
Wow.
great.
He's not on the council anymore, but it was pretty contentious.
It was pretty sad.
Wow.
It was pretty contentious. The people were really against that project. I think it was Enterprise.
I think
It was either enterprise or shelter.
I think it was Enterprise. Another question that comes to mind too would be to talk about, how do you define workforce housing? We were talking about that.
Right.
Yeah.
I when I took a look at what was online, and I looked at the counties, and I know what ours is. Basically, the Urban Land Institute defined workforce housing as housing affordable to households earning between 60 and 120% of median area income. So right now, the way our MPDU program works is the maximum income for us is 100%. But if you are living in a rental apartment, we allow you to go up to 120%. So we almost fit this this definition by the Urban Land Institute. The other stuff was more vague. It didn't give a particular percentage. It just said that housing is usually considered affordable if it costs no more than 30% of gross household income. I didn't find that useful. It said workforce housing is housing that is affordable to workers and close to their jobs. Workforce housing was thought of as housing for public employees, teachers, police officers, firefighters, and other who are integral to the community, yet who often cannot afford to live in the community that they serve. I would say that generally when you're at 60% of median, you have a job.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
Got a job,
Mhm.
because, you know, so.
Yeah,
So this is people who are working, you know, at 60%. This,
Mhm.
yeah. Yeah, 60% is, well, median income's 100,000, right, 104,000. So, right, that would be about $60,000 for a family of four.
Mm.
so I was, I'll send this to you. I thought, since I couldn't find anybody that was specific enough or had credibility, I thought the Urban Land Institute definition was the clearest. And then it goes on to talk about targets middle income workers, which includes professionals professions such as police officers, firefighters, teachers, healthcare workers, retail clerks, and the like. Households who need workforce housing may not always qualify for housing subsidized by the low and moderate income housing tax credit program or the housing choice vouchers program, which are the two programs in place for addressing affordable housing needs. So I'll send this to you when this is over with, because I never quite figured out how to do this and work my computer at the same time. Plus I get on my phone, and so I'll send it to you. See if that's helpful.
Mhm.
And I'll look up some more and see, but I didn't find anything that really that was that much different or more specific.
So it sounds like the MPDU and this Anne Arundel County zoning legislation. Any other topics that we want to address with planning staff while we have them?
I think.
I'm sure we'll get into other areas, no doubt.
Can I ask what the timeline is on this first task? Do we have a deadline for?
90 days.
Well, as soon as practical, not as soon as possible, but as soon as practical. I think it's all deliberate speed. We really want your best advice that you could give us. And if we're consciously working towards the goal and we have an opinion, then as soon as you guys can come out with the opinion so that we can have it move through the legislative process. So you guys may not, you may come back to us and say, this is what I think it should be. And that doesn't mean you're necessarily drafting the legislation, because the Office of Law can work with you on making sure that everything comes together. But you guys are going to give us big picture and then tell us what are the best practices that you have seen and what you would like to see in the bill. And then we'll be able to work from there so we can have a workable solution for Annapolis.
Do we know
Mhm.
did Sally work? Is there any kind of involvement with the city and the county and the staff that created this legislation at the county to
No,
better
that's
understand?
actually a fascinating way that we can probably bring them into this discussion.
To better understand what they learned, what they knew. We don't have to recreate the wheel, because a lot of this research has been done. Because one of the things that comes to my mind is looking at other smaller cities like us and what have they done? And I don't know.
I've done that already. I've got it all.
Got it? Great. Okay.
It's all in a chart.
Good.
And
Good,
it's
'cause
only Maryland. It's only Maryland. I looked at all the jurisdictions in Maryland who had MPDU programs.
But I mean workforce housing though. I want to, like how, I remember that because you showed that MPDU legislation to us. I think we saw the chart some point, but I'm talking about how they've gone.
You're talking about zoning versus.
Or if there's something else, I don't know. I don't know what else is out there,
There's pretty
You know,
much
we might-
inclusion. It's pretty much inclusionary zoning,
Mhm.
because the whole idea is to produce affordable housing. So
Well,
it isn't, subsidized by the government. So this seems to be, unless you guys know of anything.
Or it's programmed, and you and I have talked a little bit, it's programs to encourage some nonprofit developers, other developers to get involved in development too. It's those kinds of incentives can be part of a workforce housing program too, right?
I don't understand. I'm not quite understanding what you mean.
Like the pilots and the other that you can do to encourage nonprofit or not-for-profit developers to come in. That could be part of your program for workforce housing too. Right?
Absolutely. And that
Yeah.
makes
Yeah.
sense because there are two components. One is the legal, greasing the legal skids to make it easier to get through the processes to get the project. But then there's also a financing piece to this also. And I
Right.
think that for the most part, even if the recommendation comes that we should strongly consider, you know, reduced type services or pilots or whatever the case may be,
Right.
or at least the authority should be given in the legislation that the city council can pursue it. It depends on how how important of a part of the conversation we think that piece really is.
Right, because that's one of the problems that the city has, is typically we do provide a pilot for low-income housing tax credit projects, because they need a pilot. We don't provide them for Section 8 projects because they get market rate reimbursement, so they're really not needed. But we don't have a formal process for pilots.
And that's one of
we
the
don't have is the
recommendations.
process.
That's one of the recommendations of the task force. It's included among those recommendations to actually have a program, some kind of a routine process for
Right.
granting or not granting pilots.
Yeah, you
Right.
bring
Yeah,
up a
I
good-
can't. I'm sorry.
I was just saying, you bring up a good point about the task force findings. So that really
Right.
would be very
That
helpful.
is, that is one part of them, the recommendation.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that this group will be looking at also. So maybe that pilot could be looked at when they make the
Right.
recommendation comes through.
It might be possible to do a joint meeting where this workforce housing discussion can be had with, because we really want the best ideas, and I know that everyone, especially in the task force, is very passionate about this topic. And so given as many ears as possible, maybe at the next meeting we do the combination of the two, where there's a presentation by planning and zoning first, and then we follow it with the work session of sorts between,
Great.
because then we might get better ideas, or at least we at least will be on the same page. And they might say, well, since you guys are handling this, it may not necessarily come back to be a finalized finding, but you guys could take this off our table or whatever the case may be.
Well, and also perhaps we should have ACDS, have Kathy or as we talked about the other day, have Kathy Koch or
Aaron.
Yeah, come and talk about sort of what led up to the county's workforce housing approach through the zoning.
That'd be great.
Zoning.
Yeah.
And we can try to figure out how best to mesh these two approaches.
Right. Yeah, we did talk about that. I think that would be helpful to kind of hear how the sausage was made on their part.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So that should be done when Sally is.
When Sally.
It's probably enough for one.
Yes, absolutely.
One meeting.
Because
Okay.
we might be able to do the crossover meeting by a work session where it will be kind of more informal. It'll be during the day. And it's a joint meeting, but it's a joint meeting for the purpose of brainstorming.
Right.
Kind of
Right.
different from, taking up the agenda time in the evenings. It might be something for us to think about using an alternate process.
Yeah, I like that idea. Sort of doing that separately, and it would be, better to do that once they've sort of finalized their recommendations, and then it'd be
Right. I said
down
last time, the recommendations, I hadn't seen them for quite some time.
I understand
I'm not exactly
April.
sure what's on them.
Right. I understand that they're supposed to be ready in April.
Okay.
Okay. Well, then
More than I know.
that would be good timing then. And then that way too, if we just, focus on, someone from ACDS and then meeting with planning staff, then we could really focus our energy on this Anne Arundel County zoning bill, given that, there is a timeline to sort of address it and get to it. Okay. So how, Joel, what's the best way of going about coordinating those efforts? How does that generally work? Is that something you take care of?
Well, we could work with Hillary. What we'll do after you leave after this meeting is over, I guess we'll have to figure out what we're gonna do about minutes, because this occurs to me usually.
Yeah, I was gonna
Maria's
ask,
taking minutes.
Okay.
Maria Brown's taking minutes, so we have a person. She's not here, but she'll take them off. Something happened and she couldn't be here. Normally she'd be here, but
All
she'll
right,
be
not a problem.
taking them off. That she'll watch this and do the minutes of this meeting.
Because I think
Okay.
what coming out of discussion, we have 2 action items. Well, it's 3 action items, but the primary action item is we're gonna be bringing in planning and zoning for a presentation on the current programs we have in place that affect affordable housing. We'll be reaching out to the county so we could find out from the counties their successes and their thought process in creating the legislation and how it worked out for them, and what recommendations they would have for us in our process.
Yeah.
And then the third action item is a joint meeting at some point in the future where we could say where we are, this committee is, and then reflect on the work that the task force is doing, and seeing how we might be able to improve what we have come up with or our research by running it against some of those very talented individuals in that task force.
Right. And maybe prioritize,
Yes.
what they're looking at. I'm sorry, Jackie, did you want to say something?
No, no.
Okay. Is there anything else?
Give me 1 second. I'm going to share the agenda again.
I think I remember what the final text.
adjourn.
Is there a motion? Does anybody want to say anything else before we end the meeting? Okay, hearing none. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll
I
second it.
second it.
Okay, all those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
I.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?